Start the session. Huh? We'll join. Okay. We start the session 3 and welcome back to session 3. Um, and this session is a bit challenging session, not for we are going to deal with economic issues because it's a post-lunch, post-lunch. But we'll certainly raise to the challenges and we will try to pick up the thread left over by the session 2 and before lunch on maritime security cooperation. Maritime and the trade investment relations are both are interconnected, and we have achievements and the future prospects that we need to discuss in the session. We have 4 speakers. There is some replacement in the speaking slot, and I will go by the line of order given to me by the organizer. Before I start, a couple of points, like to raise. But before I start giving just introduction, I can see Dr. Amitan Dupalit and Dr. Assis and Dr. Fiora Faisal, both are online. So our speakers are online. But how about the other one, Mr. Alarif, is also has joined. So the session is now we have all the speakers. But before I go to the panelists, as we are discussing from the first session, that economic relations is very important. Anything we do on the foreign policy, if we do not have economics, it may not sustain. Point 2, that bilateral trade is a 40 billion roughly. India has a trade deficit. Indonesia has a trade surplus. As an economist, deficit surplus is a short term, maybe not a short term. But in the Indonesia, if you look at that, we have in growing production links. Automobiles is one example. FDI flow between the countries 4,750. That's the number given in the concept note. It's counting about 1.2 billion accumulated FDI flow from India to Indonesia, but in reverse direction, Indonesian FDI is very limited. So far, only 13 Indonesian companies are having a business here. Well, bilateral SEPA between India and Indonesia is still under negotiation, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. We're not sure when this is going to be completed, but Indonesia is a part of ATIGA, and in the morning discussion, the ambassador and the speakers, they said that since it is under negotiation, ATIGA will be completed. Well, there are some good movement, like trade payment in local currency between the two countries. That has the agreement signed in the last March. There are some developments like payment based on the QR code. I think 2 central banks are in discussion. There are opportunities in the cruise tourism. There are opportunities in higher education. Indonesia is one of the partners in IPOI, Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, and India and ASEAN, they have issued a joint statement on ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. If you look at the trade distribution, India's import mainly from Indonesia are the primary minerals, coal, unrefined palm oil, rubber, but Indian exports to Indonesia is fairly diversified: automobiles, pharmaceuticals, bovine meat, steel, plastics, so on and so forth. So this is in general, the economic relations between India and Indonesia. But I would like to, reach out to our speakers to highlight what are the, challenges they feel, what are the opportunities they can place it to us in view of India-ASEAN as well as India-Indonesia bilateral relations. Also, there is a project called Andaman Aceh Corridor. We are going to hear from one of the speakers, and I have invited our Consul General, a good friend, Mr. Ravi Shankar Goyal. I think he is there. He has joined. If not, can you check? I think he WhatsApped me that he is here. Pankaj, Ravi Goyal, our Consul General.
From the ambassador's terminal.
Maybe sir, he might have joined
Huh? He can speak? Huh? No, you have to bring him in the main room. Uh, I would, I would like to invite Mr. Goel to give his initial remark in 5 minutes. Uh, just, he is new to the consul general in Medan in Aceh province, and in the morning, and you can see the discussion that we had, Andaman Aceh corridor, something on the Sabang Island, the discussions between in the the two distant posts, Andaman and Nicobar and Aceh. So can you bring him in the main.
So आप उनका email ID दे दीजिए मुझे वो दोबारा भेज
This is his WhatsApp email. तो
WhatsApp नंबर दे दीजिए उसमें भेज देता हूँ
आ जाइए.
तब तो दूसरों को ले लीजिए
मैं उसे करता हूँ, यहाँ से ले लीजिए WhatsApp. Well, maybe he is in the other room of the WebEx. So let me now invite Mr. Al Arif. Quickly, I have to, he is a senior research fellow at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies in Indonesia since 2020. He's a professor at the same time in economics and business in Indonesian State Islamic University in Jakarta. He is in the research, in the consulting, his experience in industrial organizations, etc., etc. So I invite him to take the floor, 10 to 12 minutes. Please, Mr. Al Arif, Dr. Al Arif, over to you. You have to unmute. We can't hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished speaker, distinguished colleagues from RIS and JCS Indonesia. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I will present about Indonesia-India trade relations. Thank you very much also for moderator that have give a prologue about surplus and deficit about trade relation between India and Indonesia. First of all, I will want to say that basically Indonesia and India have cultural closeness, and this also had been give the speech by the previous speaker in the morning. So from this, we believe Indonesia and India will have mutual beneficial cooperation between two countries. Besides that, these two countries between Indonesia and India have similarities in terms of cultural, religious, ethnic, and regional language diversities. So, in my opinion, it will be give a positive terms between relationship between Indonesia and India. Besides that, the main cooperation that is expected between India and Indonesia will be much more than not only in economics but also in education and others. Next, the Asian India Free Trade Area came into effect on the 1st January of 2010. I think it will be discussed more with Mr. Fitpa after this. And after the Asian India Free Trade Area, I think that is will be reduced and limited tax until 76 and 44% of the range of goods. If we see the development of import and export between India and Indonesia, I think it will be fluctuate and as followed by Indonesia between India. I think from years to years is also developed, and as speak by the moderator, that Indonesia has gained surplus between the relations between India and Indonesia. If we compare between January and June 2022 and 2023 in the first quarter, I think there is a little bit shifting between industry development that between export structure from Indonesia to India in industry is increased. Before in 2022, we see the industry have give percentage about 41%, and in January to June 2023, we have 55.6%. And also for the mining, but in the other side, the mining is decreased. In 2022, we have mining is about 57.8%, and in 2023, the mining is decreased into 43.4%. For oil and gas, I think it's also decreased from 0.3% into 0.1%. But in 2023, there is a little bit increase about in agriculture. If we cannot see in 2022, in 2023, we have seen that is agriculture product from Indonesia to India. If we see a little bit more details, we can see that year on year from 2022 into 2023, there is 5 non-oil and gas product with the highest growth in 5 product: jewelry and gems. It increased 3,241.82%. Nickel also increased. Coffee, tea, and spices also increased. Fish and shrimp also increased, and vehicle and parts also increased. But there is the 5 main non-oil and gas product that also decreased. There is processed meat and fish, mechanical machine, metal ore, crush and ash, inorganic chemical and organic chemicals. There is 5 products that have again highest growth and the lowest growth. If we see the high competitiveness between the export product, I think that is the product that Indonesia export that have competitiveness are indicated by the LCA index that more than 1. Some of these products include tin, chocolate, animal and vegetable oil, and wicker work and straw, and also coffee, tea, and spices. I think this is the product that have a high competitiveness in India. If you see the other side, from the development of import structure from India to Indonesia, we see that is decreasing in auxiliary raw materials. In 2022, we have 80 to 70% from India to Indonesia, and in 2023, there is decrease into 72.4%. And also for the capital goods, there is an increasing. If we see in 2022, we have 8%. In 2023, we have 16.8%. And also for the consumption good, there is increasing from 9.3% into 10.8%. If we compare that, almost the import from India to Indonesia is dominated by auxiliary raw material, although it's decreased in the last year. The highest growth of import product from India to Indonesia is iron and steel articles, vehicle components, optical devices, food industry waste, and vehicle and parts. This is the 5 product with the highest growth in 2023 if we compare with 2022. And the 5 main non-oil gas import that have the highest or the lowest growth, we can see the biggest weakness. It's wheat, sugar and confectionery, cotton, iron and steel, and ceramic products. This is the 5 main products have the highest growth and the lowest growth. From the data, we can see that there is some push factor that can give a deliberation trade relation between Indonesia and India, I think there is in both countries have a rapid economic growth, and this is give potential opportunities for the both sides to broader extent and goods and services. And also we have already known that both countries have largest population. Indonesia have about 275 million, and also India have 1 billion population. I think this is a big potential measure that can increase the trade relation between India and Indonesia. Besides that, we have a diverse commodities between India and Indonesia. Indonesia, known as major producer of products such as palm oil, rubber, coal, and fisheries product, while India has strength in information technology, textile, pharmaceuticals, and machinery. I think this diversity can allow both countries to complement each other in the trade. Besides that, we can increase foreign direct investment between two countries. Indonesia is supplying with its natural resources and more open economic policies. Besides that, in the other side, India offers a vast market and technological changes. The other factors that can push a trade relationship between India and Indonesia is cooperation, regional cooperation. As we know, ASEAN and India free trade area. This will encourage the closer economic cooperation and also reduce tariff barriers between two countries. Besides that, the other factors is infrastructure development in both countries, such as the conduction of port and transportation network, can facilitate more efficient trade between Indonesia and India. And the last one is energy cooperation. The India is one of the main importer of coal from Indonesia. Additionally, there is a potential to expand cooperation in renewable energy. Besides the push factor, we also have the challenges. I think the challenges is related with first is tariff and non-tariff barriers. The second one is logistical and infrastructure issues. Both countries still face logistical challenges such as inadequate port facilities, and also the geographical distance between two countries also adds the transportation costs. Besides that, we have the challenges in regulation between India and Indonesia, and the other factor is about trade imbalance can be a significant challenge. If one country consistently export more to other, it can lead to tension and call for corrective measures. Besides that, some of the product also have the competition in the similar sector. This competition can limit opportunities for collaboration and lead to protective measures. The other challenges is about cultural and business practice. Is why about the communication style between India and Indonesia, we have some differences. Maybe it can create misunderstanding and inefficiencies. The last one is about currency fluctuation. It can pose risk for business engaged in international trade. I think there is a high potential for India and Indonesia to still increase the trade relation between each countries and develop more in the future. Thank you very much for the opportunities, and I will give it back to moderator.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Al Arif. You were on the time. Absolutely in my watch, 10 minutes. Thank you. And certainly, your last slide, the challenges, what we are talking about, India-Indonesia, trade challenges, investment challenges. We'll come back in the Q&A. Perhaps let's wait for other speakers. Let's see what they talk about. So thank you once again. Please continue to stay with us. Let me now invite Dr. Palit. Dr. Amitendu Palit is Senior Research Fellow and the Research Lead, Trade and Economics at the ISAS, Institute of South Asian Studies at NUS, Singapore. And more importantly, he's our good friend. We have been collaborating with him, and he's a great author. He has been contributing on the trade and trade-related issues. And Dr. Palit, floor is yours. So 10 minutes to you as well. Do you have a PowerPoint or?
No, Dr. I don't have a PowerPoint.
Okay, please go ahead.
I don't have a PowerPoint. Thank you. Thank you so much. And let me first begin by thanking RIS, uh, Dr. Prabir Dey, and Dr. Pankaj Vashisht, and the ASEAN Center for inviting me to this very significant occasion when India and Indonesia are looking back at the 75 years of their diplomatic engagement and formalization of ties. And let me try to position my thoughts in the context of this background. I think in a broad global and regional sense, India and Indonesia have both experienced a significant increase in their strategic importance over the last 25 to 30 years. And I will not go into the details of how that increase has come because I'm sure much about it has been discussed in the previous sessions. But what I would like to reflect on is the current role that both countries are playing in articulating certain new and different ideas with respect to global and regional economic development. The first of these, I think, is the articulation of the idea of the global south. We all know that Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa, between them comprise a group of large developing emerging market economies who have been holding or will be holding the presidency of the G20 in the first few years of this current decade. We also know how important the first few years of this current decade has been insofar as the changes in the global political and economic order is concerned. In between this change, which was first set in by the US China tariff escalation, followed by the unprecedented COVID 19 pandemic, subsequently further realignments among countries, new strategic developments, India and Indonesia somehow have managed to retain their focus on a narrative which has assumed great importance in today's world, and that is the narrative of the global south. And I would like to specifically emphasize on this idea because if we had been having this discussion 4 or 5 years ago, perhaps we would not have noted the great salience of the global south. Today, the global south is not just an idea, the global south is also an important alternative perspective to current and future courses of economic development. And it is contributing very significantly to the way in which the modern economic challenges should be handled by countries across the world. To that extent, I think India and Indonesia's contributions have been very significant, and it is indeed fitting that both countries have held G20 presidencies in succession, and they continue to work very significantly in areas of common interest for the global south. And at the same time, they have also assumed considerable significance as convening powers in their own respective spaces. So they're able to bring not just other emerging markets, but also the developed world into conversation around issues that are of specific interest and concern to the global south. In that regard, let me also just turn the relationship back a little closer to the bilateral strands that we thought, and the previous speaker took us through very detailed understanding of the India-Indonesia trade relations. And as Dr. Dwe had noted in his opening remarks, there's an interesting dichotomy in the India-Indonesia economic relationship. When it comes to trade, bilateral trade, India imports much more from Indonesia than it exports to Indonesia. But when it comes to investment, India is a much bigger investor in Indonesia. And in that sense, it is a much bigger exporter of capital to Indonesia as opposed to Indonesia in India. Now, this actually creates a very interesting line of signage. And I think, as some of my Indonesian colleagues would reflect on the fact that we have seen over the years Indian capital beginning to play an important role in the growth of local production networks within Indonesia and taking advantage of the fact that Indonesia is part of an ASEAN system of trade, investment, and seamless cross border connectivity network. These Indian businesses have also been able to establish their presences for exporting out of Indonesia to other markets and becoming part of the regional supply chains. I think that is a point which is very important to note because I don't think any other country in Southeast Asia has actually given this breadth and depth of synergistic conversations to Indian businesses insofar as positioning themselves in hubs in the Asia Pacific is concerned and contributing to exports. And if I could take this idea a little forward and argue that we now have President Prabowo, who is in Indonesia, will be running the country, and there is a renewed focus back in Indonesia on export-oriented production, which will be backed by FDI that is oriented towards production of local enterprises that look closely at the third markets for export. Once this strategy gains prominence in Indonesia's external economic engagement, one would argue that India actually becomes a very effective partner in this regard and does continue to play a very effective role in this regard. So, as some of us are aware, that India has now come to be recognized in a very interesting category from an Indonesian business perspective. India is being recognized as one of the most important non-traditional economic partners of Indonesia. And I think this is important because traditionally, historically, Indonesia being a member of the ASEAN has actually had much greater, closer economic engagement with the rest of the ASEAN members, China, Japan, Korea, which is natural. But today, India has also picked up a position of prominence in its engagement in that regard. I'll now touch very briefly upon the first point that I mentioned with respect to the contribution of India and Indonesia in the idea of Global South and the areas that are very specifically of common concern for both India and Indonesia. I think the first of these is clearly climate change and sustainable development because as two countries with different categories of vulnerable populations and also at the receiving end of extreme weather events, both India and Indonesia have experienced the vulnerabilities and they are both completely aware of the kind of economic distresses that climate change has been bringing on. So the stage is very well set for both countries to collaborate closely in the area of climate change, which actually they have started doing, not just in the field of sustainable technology collaboration, but also in the field of disaster management, extreme weather event management, and so on and so forth. I'd like to push this point a little forward to finally bring India and Indonesia into another spectrum of very important strategic salience. Both India and Indonesia are key actors in the idea of Indo-Pacific. Now, for a long time, Indo-Pacific had remained primarily a security narrative. But for the last 4 to 5 years, and since the outset of COVID, the Indo-Pacific has gained an economic identity. And this economic identity has not just come in through rules-based frameworks like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, where both India and Indonesia are active members, but also through other smaller engagements, which involve India and Indonesia together or bilaterally. So today, when one looks at India and Indonesia as partners, for a long time that partnership was confined to the ASEAN framework. It continues to draw strength from their mutual presence in the ASEAN framework. India and Indonesia are mutually strategic, comprehensive strategic partners of each other. But today, that idea of collaboration has expanded into the Indo-Pacific. They are both contributing to regional rule making in a very significant way. And that is evident from the fact that both countries have actually contributed handsomely to pillars like supply chain and clean economy in the Indo-Pacific economic framework, where a lot of projects and initiatives that have been begun are bringing India and Indonesia together, including their businesses and stakeholders, to reflect purposefully. The final point that I would like to put forward in this regard is from a somewhat narrower, again, very critical strategic perspective. Both India and Indonesia are beginning to play a very important role in a China plus one diversification strategy. That is a point which is worth noting because as we see greater escalation in trade tensions, particularly reciprocal actions on tariffs, there is going to be an obvious diversification of investments away from China into locations from where easier access to other major global markets of the world are possible. Now, in this respect, Indonesia has done well in being able to position itself as an important location for rebranding and repositioning of investment away from mainland China within Southeast Asia. Similarly, recent surveys are also indicating the fact that India is one of the highestly placed locations in terms of its ability to attract investment, which is moving away from mainland China into major supply chains. Now, what this means is that while Indonesia has already started positioning itself as what is being referred to as a group of quote unquote connector economies in a new phase of re-globalization following the outbreak of geopolitical tensions and trade actions, India also, in its own nuanced way, stands well positioned to become a part of this greater group of connected economies. And in that sense, the convergence between India and Indonesia in their economic collaboration becomes a completely natural outcome. So I will stop here and I look forward to the continuation of the discussions out here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paled. I mean, you have covered quite a wide spectrum of India-Indonesia relations, not only in the bilateral, also you have touched upon Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, yes. And this is very new, we haven't discussed so far from the morning, where India and Indonesia are both the members. Interestingly, the China plus one diversification strategy is a good one. We are going to discuss more, I think, in the Q&A if we have a time. Other issues, certainly, these have been discussing, since morning, the climate disaster management. So thank you very much, Dr. Palit. Please stay with us, and we are going to listen to other speakers in this session. Let me invite the next speaker, Mr. Assis Kapahi, the Chief Executive Officer, ASEAN Economic Forum. Is he here, Mr. Assis? Yeah, he's here. Yeah. Okay, good. Let me introduce him. His CV resume. He's a visionary business leader with over 25 years of experience in the dynamic world of technology. In 2005, he earned a nomination for the Outstanding Chief and Senior Executive Overseas Award from Singapore, and he has been working in different multinational organizations, in the banks, and tech companies. So, Mr. Assis, the floor is yours. It's 10 to 12 minutes as well to you.
Dr. Day, thank you. I want to take the opportunity to first thank RIS, Dr. Prabir Day, and Dr. Pankaj Vasisht for inviting me to this conference. I'm joined by a very illustrious and learned panel. I think I'm probably the least qualified, but I will try to give a perspective from a practitioner and somebody who's been involved with the industry. So let me start off with a few points on how the global landscape is being reshaped and what are the 5 key forces that are driving this landscape. So we are looking at de-dollarization, we're looking at population dynamics, artificial intelligence, retreat from globalization, and rise in various global conflicts. I'm made to understand that today, if we look at the larger and the smaller conflicts, but there are about 30 odd different conflicts in and around the world, and all of these are bringing a totally new dynamics to the discussion of ASEAN and India's relationship with ASEAN as well. So here are a few observations that I've had. I'm sorry, like Dr. Palit, who's a dear friend, I won't be making any presentation. I will be just speaking. So here are some observations about the India and Indonesia diplomatic relationships in terms of how similar we are. So both countries, as you know, are non-aligned. We have good bilateral relationships with everyone, whether it's the south or the north, and we have sort of followed the non-aligned movement since 1961. Both countries have a strong balance sheet. We are showing consistent economic growth. We are stable and vibrant democracies. Now, the definition of democracy obviously changes. If you look at uh, the Western way of democracy, well, that may differ, but in our own way, we are vibrant and stable democracies. We are solving for very similar socio-economic and development related issues. Technically, we are neighbors. Andaman Nicobar is just about 80 nautical miles away from Indonesia, and we both happen to be G20 members. I also understand that we have had our double taxation avoidance treaty since 2012. Now, I'm going to go on to, I think, what has been already said earlier. We have been partners for over 2000 years. Whether it was culture, whether it was trade, or even for that matter, religion, most faiths have, whether it was Hinduism, Buddhism, or even Islam, has traveled to Indonesia from the shores of India. Now, from an economic perspective, India has become uh, Indonesia's in ASEAN we have become in ASEAN Indonesia has become India's largest trading partner. We have surpassed Singapore. We are currently at about 38 to 40 billion dollars, whereas Singapore is sort of around the 35 billion mark, and we are looking at furthering this to about 50 billion trade by 2025. India is the second largest buyer of coal and crude oil from Indonesia and imports mineral, rubber, plum, paper, etc. etc. I think there are over 40 Indian companies, which was already said earlier. I had the privilege of being at a golf tournament hosted by the ambassador, I think Ambassador Sandeep Chakravarti is here, on Saturday, and we could see every single prominent Indian brand was participating there in Jakarta, from the SRs of the world to Ispats to Tata Motors, Mahindra, TVS, Royal Enfield, anyone and everyone, any big brand that you could think of, they were all present there. I'm also made to understand that as Dr. Palit had said, that India is investing and manufacturing now, creating manufacturing base, and from there exporting to the third world, to third countries from there, which is setting a new paradigm. Content, McDonald's has in Indonesia in manufacturing HIV drugs through a venture partnership. We've also had a healthcare company called Nephoris Plus, which has invested in building hospitals and dialysis centers. So these are some of the things that are doing fairly well in terms of the partnerships that we've had with Indonesia. Now, the current areas of cooperation, as I see them, that exist, are in the energy sector. So you've got infrastructure development. Both countries are focusing on coal, oil, gas, renewable energy, and energy conservation. We have technology and medicine, and discussion of engagement, create man. There is who is collab come to uh, different uh, starting uh, block the time payments and local currency trade between India and um, Indonesia. Now, as you know that India has been very successful in creating the UPI, which today has about 352 or to 400 million active users, and there is a volume of some $2.2 trillion generated on it. Now, this is a very interesting sort of a discussion that India can lead with Indonesia. So this brings me back to a discussion on DEFA, which is the Digital Economic Framework Agreement that Indonesia and the ASEAN states are negotiating. I mean, it's an ASEAN discussion. The DEFA is will bring will make ASEAN a single digital corridor. Today, the digital trade is expected to be $1 trillion by 2030, but with DEFA coming in at the right time, this could increase to almost $2 trillion. And Indonesia being 35% of overall of ASEAN, which whether it's population or whether it's the GDP, India has a large footplay here when it comes to being a part of creating the digital infrastructure or a UPI equivalent for Indonesia. And I want to back this with a slightly different argument. Now, Indonesia has about 64 million MSMEs, which are the backbone of the Indonesian economy, and which is very much the case of India as well. Now, these MSMEs account to about 97% of the overall organizations, and probably a similar number of the employment that it creates. Interestingly, when we look at the M, which is the micro part of the MSME, which is also known as the gig economy, there the income levels of people are between $100 to $500. And I'm going into the specific because it's easier for me to explain this. These people are still non-bankable, and there is a large portion of these people. So I understand that only 35 to 40% of people in that space are bankable. And if they were to be added on and made bankable by coming up with an initiative like UPI, that would tremendously add economic value for Indonesia and also great value for India to participate in an initiative like that. Now, the fact that again I'm making this point, Indonesia is 35% of ASEAN, whichever way you look at it, also sets a precedence for a larger participation for India in the DEFA discussions or equivalent of DEFA. So, I mean, my understanding is that Singapore has a DEFA equivalent with New Zealand, which is called DEPA. So, India can possibly also look at something with Indonesia as a start to participate in this. So, this is one part of it. The second part is that we have many other discussions within ASEAN, like the ATIGA discussion, which is going on, the ASEAN Trades in Good Refresh discussion. Digital, as I understand and as we all know, it cut across all horizontals, so it cuts in all the industries. And with digital participation, we will also be able to impact the other trade that happens within ASEAN and trade that happens between India and Indonesia. Now, a classic example, and because I come from the industry, I like to sort of substantiate this with some examples. So, India has something called the ONDC, the Open Network Digital ONDC corridor, whatever they call it. Now, ONDC essentially is the next stage to UPI. What India is trying to do with ONDC is that it's trying to ensure that any trade that happens, one has to be digitized, and secondly, it has to go through the ONDC network. So essentially, it's a sort of a natural progression to what UPI is. India has set up a corridor with a company called, not a company, with an organization called Proxterra, which is an IMDA sort of organization, Government of Singapore organization, and very similar in nature to what ONDC does in India. And ONDC and Proxterra operates outside of Singapore, so they have relationships in Africa and certain parts of ASEAN like Philippines and the others, where they have created those digital bridges for trade. So similarly, setting up similar bridge with Indonesia would also help. It would help with the digital trade as well as the other trade which exists. These are some of the examples that I like to sort of share. Now, coming back to my point of the MSMEs not being able to participate financially, one of the reasons for that has been the cost. The For banks to service somebody who earns in the range of $100 to $500 a month, it is prohibitable, and so that is the reason they are not. Now, with the India stack and the UPI and the wallets that we have created, we can then create the concept of DBT, and that can also be linked to direct payments from India, not just within Indonesia, but from India. So it would give us that buffer where there is total transparency in how the trade happens between the countries. So these are some of the examples that I like to substantiate. That I've substantiated. Now, the other aspect is India has close to 100,000 startups. They are tech startups, but they're also solving for real-time problems. So does Indonesia. Now, both of them are solving similar problems, and being involved in one such initiative ourselves in the last month or so, where we brought a mission and we led a mission called the ASEAN India Scale Hub program. We had about 75 odd scale up companies, organizations which are revenue generating and which are now looking at expanding into ASEAN and expanding into India. We found that there were so many of these technologies that are available and which are solving real time problems, which can benefit both the countries. So technology transfer is another very important aspect, and I'll give you examples of some great technologies that we've seen. We've seen anti-drone technologies, unmanned aerial vehicles, agri-tech related products, blockchain related products, cybersecurity, food related products, AI, disaster management, and so on and so forth. And all of this is solving problems both ways. So there is obviously an opportunity to sort of work with India and Indonesia together on this. Okay, so before I end, as I started off in my earlier in my speech, we are navigating through geopolitical shifts. There are looming elections in certain parts, and the global demands are adjusting. Now, because India and Indonesia are, in very, very different sort of a relationship. We have partnered, in G20, we have been part of the WTO, we have the ASEAN India FTA, etc. And along with all this, we have a robust GDP growth, we have a youth population, we have ongoing structural reforms that are currently going on, and we have increased FDIs coming in with digital transformations happening. I think between India and Indonesia, we are in a good space to continue growing the bilateral trades and strengthening the relationships that we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Assis. In this session, the four speakers are all in virtual, but your presentation on the digital economy, it offers great hope for India-Indonesia and India-Indonesia and ASEAN as well. We'll come back if there is a time to know more about DEFA, Digital Economic Framework Agreement that ASEAN is negotiating among the 10 countries. But thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Now let me move on to our last speaker, Dr. Hasiadi, Faisal Hasiadi. So he is with University of Indonesia in Jakarta. Dr. Hastiadi, sorry, my bad pronunciation. He completed his PhD from Waseda University in Japan. He has been working in different organizations in the private sector. Also, he was senior advisor to the Ministry of Trade. He is a commissioner of Infra Digital Nusantara and the co-founder advisor at the Next Policy. He has a teaching experiences in microeconomics, development economics, and the Asian economy. So over to you, Dr. Hastiadi. Please, 10 to 12 minutes as well to you.
Okay. Good. Chairman. Then, can you see my share? Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it, yes. Please go ahead.
Okay.
You can switch off your video so that, we can listen to you.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Please. Yeah.
Thank you for from our for me to present the story of ASEAN, Indonesia, and also India. So I've never been to India before, but India very close to me since because actually most of Indonesia we were raised Hollywood movie. Yeah, during offspring, Pinda, Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan, Salman Khan, and our actors are actually overwhelming childhood. So in the sense, I've never been there, but India seems so close for most of Indonesia. So if you see the globe today, two most highest performers in terms of economic comes, countries, India and also Indonesia. Here, we are also becoming the center of gravity since we are now facing the trend of offshoring and also reshoring, and not to mention the friendshoring. We have the US and also the EU versus China and also the groupings. We have Russia also in the next corner. But I think Indonesia, ASEAN, and also India serves as the countries that can actually, bring a common platform as the place to meet, as the place to have some kind of the economic consolidation. As Dr. Palit mentioned earlier about the geopolitical tensions, how the US and also the EU, in the terms of friendshoring, are actually trying to divest and trying to actually minimize their trade and investment activities to China and France. But at the same time, ASEAN, Indonesia, ASEAN, and presumably India here, we are actually offering the second best in terms of production network, in terms of the value chain. because as we can see, if you're actually trying to divert from China, it is actually um, quite expensive if you take back to the host country in the US and also the EU. The cost of production will be very, very high. So in that sense, it's actually quite rational to put all of your stuffs. Yeah, you're taking it back from China, but the US and EU are actually seeing that ASEAN and France are actually becoming the place to have some kind of the economic consolidation. So in that sense, it's not it's not the most efficient production network, but it offers you resiliency since we are actually seeing China as the most efficient global production network and regional production network in the globe, not only in regional perspective, but of course, taking it back go through to the West is actually quite expensive. So in that sense, ASEAN, India, and with the the ideology of neutrality can actually offer an economic alternatives, yeah, for the frenemies from of the friendshoring activities. So, with that respect, ASEAN has actually become more to a regional hub. As I repeatedly saying in some other forums, that ASEAN actually the Drupadi of the world. Yeah, so we have two versions of the story: the Japanese version and also the original Indian version. So in the Japanese version, Drupadi married with Yudhishthira, only one husband. So we can say that ASEAN Indonesia is actually also offering you some kind of the bilateral relation. But at the same time, we have another perspective, which is actually quite also common for Indonesian because we have seen Mahabharata, yeah. Here in Indonesia, we have also learned the original version of Mahabharata that Drupadi has five husbands, the Pandavas, the mighty warriors. So, in that sense, ASEAN here, in the perspective of the Mahabharata, becomes the Drupadi that can actually entangle the mighty warriors. We're here, yeah. Of course, we can also offer you some kind of the bilateral relation, but at the same time, because of the soft and open regionalism, ASEAN can also have individual bilateral relation and at the same time regional cooperation. So it actually gives you another chance to actually making economic cooperation and economic efficiency. Of course, we are actually facing the two perspectives of regionalism. One is coming from Jagdish Bhagwati and the other one is coming from Baldwin. Of course, from Bhagwati's perspective, multilateralism is the most ideal case. But at the same time, we are seeing that multilateralism at the form of WTO is not very effective since we have so many. In that sense, the bilateral and also the region-wide cooperation also offers you another alternatives. So we have not the spaghetti ball, but we have the very foundation that can actually shape the world after COVID. So now, if we see the world today, of course, yeah, we have so many regional trade agreements. In that sense, in the perspective of Bhagwati, this will create the so-called spaghetti ball effect. But at the same time, since the multilateralism, as I mentioned earlier, is not working well, we need to face this reality. This is the second best. Okay, this can be very random, but at the same time, it can also be very, unilateral. Yeah, unilateral in terms of the globalization as opposed of regionalism. But it's okay since from many of my research also suggests that the more is the more is merrier. So if you have this kind of entanglement across the world, be it bilateral region relation or region-wide perspective as opposed of multilateralism, it can be actually functional as well as only if and only if it is actually combined into a WTO plus perspective, which is actually very common nowadays if you are seeking for trade and investment agreement across the globe. So coming back again to the story that we have of the Indo-Indians relation, also ASEAN-Indian relation, we have the typical gravity equation. So in the gravity equation, the Newtonian gravity equation in international economics suggests that the two region or the two countries can be actually can increase the trade and investment intensities through the relative mass. From it we can see it from the GDP, from the market, from the population, as well as the distance. We have the physical distance and non-physical distance. But nowadays, since technology is here to stay and is the advancement of technology making it possible for us to cut the distance, so the physical distance is no longer an issue. What becomes an issue for most of the trade and investment initiatives, most of them coming from the non-physical distance, the politics, ideology, culture, language, and so on and so forth. But as I mentioned earlier, we have so many in commons between India and also Indonesians. We have also so many in commons between India and also the rest of ASEAN countries. So in doing so, if we can actually, making a greater cooperation, the foundation is already here. We have development proximities. We have also some kind of the institutional proximities, and as I mentioned to you in the prologue, we have actually a big and a very solid proximities in terms of culture. So as I told you before, I've never been to India, but it seems close for me. I think it seems close for most of Indonesia. Even the Indonesian musics dangdut is actually very much inspired by the Indians dancing and also music. So we have very much in common. So in that sense, in making trade and investment activities in reality in a more concrete way is actually, the constraint is relatively limited. So we have some of the calculation of the potential trade liberalization. So from the first paper, the welfare gain of cutting the tariff is actually very positive for us, India and also Indonesia. If we have a full liberalization, actually the welfare gain will be quite very much actually doubled or tripled. This is for the scenario of Indonesia and also India. And for the case of ASEAN, this is the macroeconomic impacts of the full liberalization. Of course, we have some of the negative impacts for several countries. Yeah, for example, here, according to this paper, we have some negative impact for Cambodia and Laos. Yeah, and then we have also in terms of GDP, we have also so many unemployments. For example, if we actually trying to push this full liberalization, of course, because if we have liberalization, there will be a displacement. But the idea is to try to minimize the loss. Another scenario is actually also happening here from the ultimate scenario that actually try to incorporate all of the FTAs is actually very beneficial for most of ASEAN countries, meaning that the spaghetti ball effect is not existing. So by doing so many FTAs that entangled so many countries in ASEAN member countries, plus so some of the countries, for example, here India, that can offers us a greater benefit. Yeah, so the benefit is actually outmatch the loss. So this
Dr.
is
Dr.
taken
Faisal,
from my paper.
I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. You have 1 more minute.
Okay, okay, thank you. So, as my conclusion for for this session, so this is also taken from my paper, our paper in 2017. Um, the idea of making FTAs and also another economic cooperation initiative, most of the time is actually, the shortcomings are actually creating trade diversion. Sorry, trade diversion. But from my our earlier calculation, there should be a trade creation as well as it is actually minimizing the trade diversion. So by making, for example, the ASEAN India FTA or making a bilateral FTA between India and also Indonesia, there are so many benefits, but there are only less loss. So the benefit always actually outmatching the cost. So let's move together because the story is not ending here. The story is still there as the Draupadi actually tried to entangle all of the husbands. ASEAN is also trying to entangle all of the mighty countries together to consolidate and to achieve greater benefit. Thank you, and yeah,
Thank
that's
you
the
very
speech.
much, Dr. Faisal. Excellent presentations. Last 2 slides are quite revealing. And thank you for talking about trade creation, trade diversifications. The one I am taking from your presentation, the technology is actually melting the distance. So thank you very much. So now we have our CG from Medan, Mr. Ravi Goel. So let's hear from him, Mr. Goel. Yeah. So over
Good
to you.
afternoon, Professor. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Yes, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. We are celebrating our 75th anniversary of our strong, stable, and reliable diplomatic relations, and it gives me immense pleasure to give my special remarks on this important topic trade and investment relations, achievements, and future prospects. Our bilateral trade has grown substantially since 2004 from meager 4.3 billion to 38.8 billion US dollars in 2022, and our new target is to take it to US dollar 50 billion. Friends, India has 3 diplomatic establishments in Indonesia, Indian Embassy in Jakarta, and 2 consulates in Medan and Bali. As is well known that Jakarta is better connected economically and Bali is connected in tourism with India. Hence, I would like to speak about Sumatra Island. Sumatra Island has 10 provinces which are equivalent to states in India. To make my point, I would focus on market size, connectivity, tourism, and people to people context, which can give new direction to our trade and investment relations in this region. Friends, Sumatra Island is the largest island of Indonesia. The island has 5 of the largest cities of Indonesia in terms of population, and the island has a population of approximately 58 million. It is worth noting from international perspective that there are only 24 countries in the world that have more population than Sumatra Island. Similarly, the vast size of Indian population of 1.4 billion provides a huge market for the products from Sumatra region of Indonesia. Looking from the perspective of connectivity infrastructure, Sumatra Island has many international airports, and one among them, Kuala Namu International Airport in North Sumatra, is under expansion through a joint venture between Angkasa 2 and GMR Group India. Kuala Namu International Airport is being developed to serve as hub for international travel connecting transit passengers from the neighboring countries. However, still there is not a single direct flight connecting India and Sumatra Island. Most of the travel happens via Malaysia or Singapore. Just to give another example, Riau and North Sumatra provinces are very rich in palm plantation. Indonesian export of palm oil to Indonesia was more than 4 billion US dollars last year. Interestingly, two of the major seaports in Sumatra Island, Belawan in North Sumatra province and Dumai in Riau province, are on the side of one of the busiest Malacca Strait sea routes in the world, and these two Indian seaports are also the closest to India. However, there is no direct shipping line connecting these two Indonesian seaports with India. Similarly, Sabang port is closest to Andaman and Nicobar Island. India and Indonesia are working towards better connectivity between Aceh and Andaman and Nicobar Island. For tourism, Indonesia has identified Lake Toba in North Sumatra province as a priority area to be developed. Lake Toba is world's largest volcanic lake. It is surrounded by low rising mountains and provides unparalleled scenic beauty. It is well connected with Kuala Namu Airport in North Sumatra. Last year, the number of Indian tourists visiting Bali was 600,000. This shows that there is a huge potential for Indonesia to attract Indian tourists to explore Lake Toba also. Indonesia can develop tailor-made itineraries for the Indian travelers to Lake Toba. The increased tourism not only can boost people-to-people contact, but could also help start direct flights between North Sumatra and India. Similarly, the people in Sumatra region could use the direct flight connectivity to explore incredible Indian touristic places as well as potentially avail the world-class Indian healthcare facilities at a significantly lower cost. Friends, these appear to be priority areas which can qualitatively increase in trade and investment between India and Indonesia, especially from Sumatra region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goel. Short but very powerful intervention. Um, Let me now open the floor. We have 10 minutes time, and I can first come to you. Please, Kaushik ji.
Thank you, Professor De. This was a very interesting session for us at Dakshin, the Global South Center of Excellence also. So let me pick up 4 points for observations. I don't have any questions, but these observations can feed into what we want to do next after this workshop. The first is to add one more area where India and Indonesia are collaborating very well, and that is in the WTO. So we are working together and having similar positions in several areas, like in the recent joint statement initiatives on e-commerce, on investment facilitation, etc. And India and Indonesia together formed what was called as the G33 in agriculture against the Keynes group back in before the Cancun Ministerial Conference. So there is a lot in common in terms of our working together in international and multilateral forums. The second point I want to pick up from both Dr. Palit and Mr. Ali Ashish Kapahi about how India and Indonesia are ideally suited for progressing participation in regional and global value chains. There has been some mention about the Indian investments. Our CG also talked about such investments. And although India has a negative trade deficit with Indonesia, but the Indian imports are imports that are feeding into Indian value chains. And similarly, Indian exports can feed into the Indonesian value chains, which are then becoming a part of the regional ASEAN value chains. So this is an area where I think the two countries have not exploited their potential enough, and there are several reasons why it should be done so that Indonesia can become for Indian products a part of the value chains that make Indonesia a hub for this participation in the entire region, not only in ASEAN but go beyond to New Zealand and Australia. The third point is about disaster management, cooperation in disaster management. We have already heard a lot about the collaboration that is happening, in spite of the fact that both these countries are either part or not part of some of the international normative progresses that are being made in the disaster risk reduction areas. The fact is that they have been able to help each other. They have been India has been first responder in several of the instances in Indonesia. And more importantly, from the trade point of view, the collaboration in disaster management area gives rise to a potential for increased trade in the tools and equipment that, and also the capacity that needs to be built. So that is the third area that needs to be looked at. I remember 2 years back in the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Conference in Bali, I was participating with my Indonesian colleague, and we were, after the conversation, coming back and actually noting down what all we can do together in terms of selling to each other, not only building capacities on disaster management. The fourth is the most important point, which has been mentioned in particular by Mr. Ashish Kapahi, and Professor Dey also mentioned the digital economy aspect. So I represent Dakshin, the Global South Center of Excellence at RIS, and on behalf of that center, I must tell you that of the three priority areas of Dakshin, one is digital solutions. So we are looking at digital solutions which are being evolved in the Global South and being shared across the countries of the Global South, for each other. And Dakshin is a platform for such development solutions. So, Mr. Ashish Kapahi, I have chosen 3 points in particular from your presentation, which I think are going to be very useful to also look at possibly how India can leverage the Digital Economic Framework Agreement, the DEFA, that ASEAN is negotiating currently. The first is UPI, you already mentioned. You mentioned how India and Singapore have collaborated on a fintech platform. A UPI or UPI type platform can be created between India and Indonesia, and this is something on which already overtures have been made from both sides. So there needs to be a push from the business side also to find possibilities of customizing the platform that we have here at UPI to the needs of a country which has 7,000 islands. 17,000 islands. I beg your pardon. So there would be obviously needs for some customization. There would also be need for using different tools, maybe satellite-based connectivity. The second point is about ONDC. So the beauty of ONDC is that it is actually challenging the proprietary nature of e-commerce. And if we can look at the model that ONDC is presenting, it is an ideal model for MSMEs. So how can we work together with the small and medium businesses in Indonesia and India? And today, when I look at ONDC as an architecture, I don't see there is any prevention for an Indonesian MSME to onboard onto ONDC. So how to onboard is the technical aspect, and how to make it a business proposition for the MSMEs of the two countries is where the business associations of the two countries would come. Last point is about DBT. You see, the experience from the jam trinity, the Janadhan, that is the banking solutions, the unbankable, the lack of bankability of some of the MSMEs that was talked about. So the creation of bankability is Jandhan, Aadhaar is the unique identity, and mobile is the device through which the transaction takes place. If Indonesia and India can work together on this giant trinity, then maybe DBT can become a reality for the 17,000 islands in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you. Uh, okay, we don't have much time, but before I reach to the speakers for their concluding remarks, does anybody any questions from the floor? Very quick.
Sorry, I have very quick questions. I think questions are so many, but you know, recently Indonesia has started working on midday meal scheme. So I just wanted to know from Indonesian counterpart if anyone is there aware that how much they have progressed in that.
Okay. Uh, Fine. I request all the speakers, if they are still online, 1 minute or half a minute each. But tell us, the questions that I pose to all of you, that Indian FDI to Indonesia is over 1 billion, something around 5,000 Indian companies are doing business. In a return direction, Indonesians are only 13 companies, and their FDI we really do not know, very, very negligible. Professor Palit said, and very rightly, that Indonesia is having surplus in current account, also surplus in the capital account. So very, very strong position they have. Capital means FDI, they have a surplus, and trade, they have a surplus, so current account surplus. So I give 1 minute or even less than that to each one. In your concluding remarks, please tell us how to strengthen or how to facilitate Indonesian investment in India, and your final thought. So I come to in that same order. The first to Mr. Al Arif. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the once again for the opportunities from RIS and CIS Indonesia to me. I think the most important things that today is what we have to do uh, to increase the possibilities trade between India and Indonesia. I think we have a lot of things to do. One is about research. Maybe we can research what the most competitiveness between India and Indonesia, and after that, we should do some positive action about that. Maybe there's a closing remark from me. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Palit.
Thank you, Dr. Day. It's been an excellent discussion. I would come straight away to the question that you raised and have two thoughts to share. The first is, I think the India-ASEAN FTA is currently being reviewed. And if in that FTA, there is a higher, more elevated scope for investment protection between India and ASEAN, that will certainly create the ground for more investment, not just from Indonesia, but also from some other ASEAN countries. And number two is that it is always possible to bring in more Indonesian capital through a consortium-based approach. It may not necessarily just be from a bilateral sense, but if 2 or 3 ASEAN members between them can come together as a consortium, particularly through newly established frameworks like the IPEF, and specific to the areas of priority, then we can definitely see an increase in Indonesian capital in India. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Asis Kapahi, your final thought.
Thank you, Dr. Day. I think this has been a very informative session. Obviously, I've learned more than what I've contributed. But I have 2 points to make. One, and this is coming back to my discussion on DBT. Indonesia has 64% mobile phone penetration, smartphone penetration. India has about 46%. So you reverse that. And the DBT would be a very strong way of India to participate in the Indonesia economic growth. So while we talk about foreign direct investments, us making investments there also in the digital infrastructure would reap direct benefits to to India's economy as well. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that collaboration in terms, as I think what Dr. Palad mentioned, collaboration in terms of FDIs going in there and setting up manufacturing bases for export to third economies can also reap in not maybe foreign direct investments, but returns on investments made there. And these are two ways of looking at a collaboration, a distinct way of collaboration where both the economies can benefit from one another. And I think I like to rest my case with this. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Faisal? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, just an update of the data. The Indonesia is now facing a 0.9% of current account deficit this second quarter. So this is the fifth consecutive quarter we have actually experiencing deficits. So in that sense, we are actually seeing the post-pandemic, windfall profit coming from the commodities is not sustainable. So from that perspective, it is actually quite, relevant if we are trying to achieve a more deep, relation with India in a sense that we can actually achieve more of the more value-added industries, incorporating FDI and also the global chain and the global production network. But the thing is, if we actually see the past experience of the FTA, for example, here ASEAN India FTA, that is actually already in force since 2010. So the utilization rate is just less than an average FTA in ASEAN or Indonesia. So we have the average utilization rate is about 30% of the existing FTAs, which is already low. But in the sense that the ASEAN India or the possible India or Indonesia relation, the utilization rate is less than 10%. So maybe if we are trying to enhance that number, the number of FDI and also trade intensities can actually multiply. So so that actually the numbers is still low. So in the future, we need to enhance that with a greater and intense cooperation.
So thank you very much. I am not going to conclude concluding remarks for the rich discussion of this session. I thank all the panelists, 4 speakers plus our CG from Medan, and I see our ambassador from Jakarta, Mr. Chakraborty, has also joined. I thank all of them for joining, and please continue to be in touch, and please put your round. Maybe your questions will be answered the next session. And we thank all of them. Put your hand together. Give a round of applause to all the speakers. And thank you very much. I hand over to Pankaj, Dr. Pankaj, for...
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So now we will break for tea. Tea is served outside. And after about 15 minutes, we'll reconvene for the last session of this policy dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Pertanyaannya? Iya, siap nanti. No, yours. Tadi yang ditanyain apa? Lagi